Sometimes a simple stretch like this, just leaning forward gradually, slowly, and holding it gently for a long period of time, has a lot of benefits. Even though it's comparatively simple to some very fancy stretches, it has its benefits and it does a few things that you may not even expect. Now, the obvious purpose of this stretch, more often than not, is to lengthen posterior muscles of the leg back here. So as we tilt forward, as we bring the body down as a whole, what that does, at least when we're talking about the leg, is we'll rotate the innominate or the pelvis as a whole on those hip bones, that hip joint. It will allow forward rolling, and as such, the muscles in that space between, let's say the hamstrings are going basically from tibia to the innominate, they lengthen, they stretch out. We certainly get that effect. And because of the fact that we get just a little bit of a pushback on the leg, a further lengthening here, the gastroc muscles, for instance, also that soleus and I'd say gastrocnemius mainly, but these guys also lengthen too. You can mention all the fascia around and in between that bind these things together. That will lengthen as well, of course. And this is a valuable stretch, certainly for that purpose. All very good, all good stuff. But it can do even just a little bit more than that. Get rid of that for clarity. There we go. When we're looking at this picture, so this is the person, if it's not obvious, it's going to look a little confusing. When we're doing this simple stretch, as we bend forward, as we bend more and more forward, there is a vertical decompression of the spine, rib cage, and many of the arm joints, in fact, because we're hanging. The closer we get, in fact, the closer we get to basically straight up and down, if you could somehow go like this, you'd have to hang yourself. I don't think that's always ideal, but you'd have to suspend yourself. That's a better word. Suspend yourself by your feet. But if we get closer to vertical, we get more of a spinal decompression or attraction. Not a serious decompression, but a bit of a decompression. So if this was the spinal joints, it would just be getting pulled downward by the weight of the body below it, above it or below it, depending on how you're looking. But the stuff here is pulling on all the stuff here. Fairly easy. As we then start to modify this, one of the things we could do is actually start to bend the arms. So as you bend the arms here, what that makes you capable of is isolating one side. Not extremely isolating, but isolating one side. So as I bring this arm up, and as I have this arm a little more on the ground, it tends to be that I get more of a pull on that one side. It brings on a sidedness, if you will. And so this means this side of the vertebrae gets pulled down in roughly that direction. It's a bit of an oblique, but it's more on the one side. So that means all the ligaments in between the vertebrae, all the muscles in between the vertebrae, and there's a lot of those, all those things get stretched out just a bit more. Stretch is not always my favorite word, but lengthened, we'll say lengthened more so on that side, creating space. And as we switch hands to the opposite side, we can aim for the opposite side. Ultimately, I hope you can actually do both sides. You can actually get rid of the hands entirely, get both bent like that, and make sure all of the weight is put on the body. Again, if it's safe to do so, if you can do this gently and slowly in a way that is relaxing to the body. With stretching, oftentimes we kind of want to look good. We want to do the cool looking stuff, fancy things, if you will. But it turns out many of the basic stretches actually have multiple uses. And the reality is, too, if you can't do that fancy position, you can often find several different movements that give you the same effect. It just takes a little longer, and you have to go a little bit slower. And you know what? Absolutely nothing wrong with that.